This PowerPoint within Unit 9 Global Change is about invasive species. And if you recall, HIPCO it used to be HIPPO, but now they're saying HIPCO, the C that was added is climate change. But it is an acronym for the things that are causing the current sixth great mass extinction. E.O. Wilson, who was actually from Alabama, he graduated from the University of Alabama and also Harvard University with a PhD in biology. He was born in Birmingham, but he had family in Mobile. And he is given credit for discovering fire ants, which were introduced into the United States in the port of Mobile from South America. But he discovered them at the age of 13, which is amazing. Um, he went on to study entomology. He actually is given credit for creating two big areas of biology, island biogeography and sociobiology, as well as coining the terms and ideas of things such as biophilia. So anyway, he has written many books. He's very prolific. I think he's at about 30 now. But it's hard not to talk about E.O. Wilson when you're talking about invasive species, and he's a great guy to mention to your students because he is from Alabama. But anyway, the I in HIPCO is invasive species, and they are second only to habitat destruction. So the letters are in order of greatest influence on our sixth great mass extinction that we're in now. H is habitat destruction, and I is invasive species. So this is a serious problem. So native species, first they need to know the difference between native species and non-native or introduced species. Native species are those that normally live and thrive in a particular community. So, they have evolved to occupy those specific habitats and niches, and they have evolved with predators and diseases to help keep their populations in check so that they do not outcompete other native populations of other species. A non-native species is one that has been introduced either accidentally or on purpose to an area where they did not, where they're not originally from. And there are many examples that we can give. We're going to talk about a few of those. But this map shows you the number of species introduced into inland waters by country. So I can remember as a kid in the 70s, I was convinced that we were all going to be killed by killer bees. It seems like there were all kinds of movies on TV and whatnot. But the Africanized honeybee, in 1957, African honeybees were crossed with native honeybees to produce a really aggressive bee, and it's escaped in Brazil and migrated northward at a rate of 200 miles per year. Luckily, however, because there's a limit on there's a minimum temperature that they can survive. So they do not survive well with a frost. So that halted their movement northward. However, also in Unit 9, of course, is climate change and some of the problems we're facing with it that are caused by climate change. And one of those is that the range of many species are changing, and so some species are becoming invasive because they're able to live now in places where they couldn't before. So the question is, will species such as these killer bees be able to migrate further northward? This slide is showing, where they are, the geographic distribution of the honeybees. Fire ants, as I was mentioning earlier, were introduced in the late 1930s. They have spread about 5 miles a year, I believe, but they have caused native species to plummet in number and wiped out species. Actually, they have reduced native ant species by 90%. So this would be interspecific competition. Intra, I-N-T-R-A, means within. So intraspecific would be competition within one species itself. But inter, I-N-T-E-R, means between. And so interspecific competition is talking about competition between two different species, which this is an example of course. So fire ants are very aggressive. And they will attack, but also just outcompete native species. They don't have any natural predators, and they produce more colonies than native ants, and they're very prolific. I'm going to go through some of these. This map is showing you the distribution. Notice that in northern Alabama, there is different species, but the boundaries does seem to be, for all of them, seems to be 10-degree minimum temperature in Celsius. The brown tree snake, there's many stories or articles you can read about the brown tree snake, especially on the island of Guam, where they were introduced accidentally in the wheel wells of airplanes, which seems to be a common occurrence. But because islands are so unique, they're geographically isolated and therefore reproductively isolated from other populations that they might be able to mate with and produce fertile offspring, but they don't because of that isolation. That has allowed them to have their own evolutionary path, and so you have indigenous species found on islands that are found nowhere else in the world. And because they're small populations, because they're on islands, they're often endangered as well. So islands such as the Galapagos Islands and the Hawaiian Islands and Guam, they're usually very protective about what comes in, because a non-native species can really wipe out a lot of native animals, such as birds. The snakes in this example will eat the eggs of birds, and birds themselves, they can catch them. They're very aggressive. They don't have any natural predators on Guam, and they eat domestic animals. This is showing you where they're native to, the native range of the brown tree snake, which was in the Papua New Guinea area. They are actually found in the southeastern United States. Another invasive species that you're familiar with is the kudzu vine. This is a unique species because of... Oh, there goes my dog Marianne. It was actually introduced on purpose. After the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, it was imported from Japan, and it was introduced to help combat soil erosion. Of course, that didn't go so well. It will cover everything, and from utility lines to houses to of course, native trees and plants, and it can kill them because they shade them and block out the sun's energy from getting to the leaves of the native plants. This is just, well, I think we've all seen this kudzu fantasy land around. And this is the distribution of kudzu here in the southeast and even in spots in the northwest. Another invasive species, the gypsy moth. It's believed in 1869 a French naturalist imported the gypsy moth to Boston. He was going to breed them as silkworms, but they eat the foliage of hardwood trees, especially oaks and cherries, and they are still spreading. They can eat all the leaves on 13 million acres of trees in one growing season, so they have done a lot of damage. The Asian longhorn beetle is native to China. It was found in New York City, in Amityville, in 1996. I can remember first hearing about this invasive species. It was believed to come over on cargo pallets, so this was not introduced on purpose, but it does affect maple trees in particular. But it will also feed on horse chestnut, poplar, willow, elm, and others. And these are pictures of the Asian longhorn beetle and its distribution. Notice that it is here in Alabama. Another species that you see in the textbooks is the purple loosestrife. It is a pretty plant when it blooms, but it is highly prolific and outcompetes native plants as well. Japanese knotwood, oriental bittersweet, garlic mustard, and bamboo all are introduced species that become invasive. But I do want to point out that not all introduced or non-native species become invasive. I used to actually incorrectly teach that as though they were synonymous, but they are not. Most species do not become invasive, and if you think about it, our crops are an example of an invasive species, so it's not something new to the country. But anyway, I have had firsthand experience with bamboo. My backdoor neighbor decided to plant a wall between our yards of bamboo, and it is growing very, very well. So what do we do? A lot of non-native species, you just have to let nature run its course. I know that in many areas have high traffic or are very visible or very important for whatever reason, you can have people going in and cutting or picking or spraying or killing or whatever. But often that is just to be able to control it in a very small area, because there's not a lot you can do, and that's my cat Dinah. There's not a lot you can do to wipe them out of that area. So one of the things that I have noticed over the years of reading AP Environmental Science exams, there's often points on the FRQs for being able to say that one of the best ways to get the public to do something or become aware of something is through education. And when you're talking about an average score of 4 or 5 out of 10 points, every point counts. So I have seen a point on many FRQs just for being able to state that doing public service announcements and educating the public in general is worth a point.